She has smoked cigarettes for over 50 years and is still a heavy smoker. She was diagnosed with a bad case of COPD at a fairly young age before I was even born, but she never stopped smoking. I am a 20-year-old man now, and my grandma is still alive, even though she has suffered multiple heart attacks and strokes and has been diagnosed with coronary artery disease and lung cancer. I remember my mom explaining to me that grandma is very sick and will die soon when I was just a little kid. All my life, she's been either sitting in a wheelchair or on the couch, or walking extremely slowly with a rollator. Only times when she stands up during the day are the moments when she goes to the balcony for a cigarette or needs to use the bathroom. In both of these situations, she almost always needs some help from my grandfather too. She's often very grumpy and you rarely see her smiling. Honestly, I wouldn't smile either if I had lung cancer and coronary artery disease and etc. Okay, back to the story. I've always liked to think that she's grumpy and annoyed only because of her illnesses, and I've never seen her as a mean or bad person. She had a habit of giving me and my siblings some pocket money every Friday on the condition that we had acted right and fulfilled our responsibilities like school and housework. We lived only a mile away from our grandparents, and my school was right next to their house. I could even see into their backyard on break time, and sometimes my grandfather was there doing some yard work and waving at me. I normally went on to pick up my weekly pocket money right after school on Fridays, and the typical meeting was very quick and quiet. I knocked on the door and waited for my grandpa to come and slowly opened the door. He always opened it just a little bit, softly said hello, and pushed his hand through the door gap. I took the money, thanked him, and at that point the door was already almost closed. Usually the visit was just that short, but sometimes Grandma wanted to come to see me quickly and walked very slowly to the door with her rollator. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, rollator or rollator. I've never seen that word before. I remember the typical situations where I only met my grandpa at the door and tried to view Grandma from the little gap that was open. It always looked dark, shadowy, and quiet inside, and I thought that Grandma is probably taking a nap. I liked the tradition of getting to meet my grandparents every Friday, and it was always nice to start for my weekend. But then one Friday afternoon, when I was about 13 or 14 years old and going to pick up my money, something very weird happened, and that sight still gives me chills and deep anxiety. It was sunny autumn day, and I got out of school a bit earlier than usual. I took my bicycle out of the bike stand and headed to my grandparents' house. Like I said, it was a little earlier than usual, so they weren't waiting for me yet. I went on to knock on their door, but no one came to open it. I waited for a moment, but still no one came. I was about to leave and thought no one was home until I heard some noises from the inside. I just didn't hear my first knocks, and I knocked again, a bit harder than last time. It still took a while, but finally the door opened, even less than normally. It was dark. I could only see the fuzzy figure of my grandpa, who didn't even say hello this time. He just gave me the money and whispered that Grandma was sleeping because we were not expecting you to come yet. At this point, the door gap was a bit bigger, so I could see into their living room, where there was some kind of dim light. I was a little ashamed about my sudden visit and decided to whisper back that I was sorry and my school just ended earlier today. Before I could say anything, I heard intensifying footsteps coming out of the living room and immediately afterwards saw my grandmother running in all capitals, through the living room in a weird, creepy, and unnatural looking forward bent posture, not moving her arms at all. I looked there for probably half a second, but I was so terrified it felt like a minute. Grandpa just slammed the door shut in front of my face, and I stayed behind the door, almost shaking from the fear and the shock. So many thoughts in my head. How can Grandma move so fast? She is very ill and can't even walk without support. Why did Grandpa lie about her nap? And what the hell was that? As I started to walk away to get my bike and leave, I calmed down and think that maybe she wasn't moving that fast, or Mom has exaggerated her bad condition. I didn't even really believe those explanations. I just had to get some logical reason for that to calm down. I walked over to the grass to get my bike that was parked right under my grandparents' bedroom. I hopped on it and took a quick look in the window that was right next to my face. What I saw next still haunts me, and even after all these years, I find it hard to think and explain. My grandma staring straight at me with big, wide open eyes and a deranged smile. She didn't even look like my grandma, or she did, but the expression was something my grandmother would never do with her face. She looked similar to the Momo face that roamed internet a couple of years ago. I don't know what the Momo face looks like. I'm gonna have to look that up. She seemed to be sitting or squatting on the floor, 'cause her face was on the lower edge of the window. So creepy, so creepy. I was instantly terrified by the thought of her being there, stalking me with that disturbing face while I stood there, calming down, and was slowly starting to leave. I remember hiding my fear and responding to her stare with a little smile, but she didn't react at all. Then my grandpa ran behind her and closed the curtains. I cycled home fast and told my mom the whole story, which she basically just ignored, thinking I over-exaggerated her speed. She couldn't understand why I was scared of her looking at me from the window, but she wasn't there. My grandma wasn't looking at me. She was stalking me. After that day, I didn't want to get my pocket money for weeks. As time passed, I started to go visit them, first with my mother and later alone again. Grandma was always like I remembered. She can't even walk without support. No one ever mentioned anything about that day, and my grandparents were asking why I suddenly stopped visiting on Fridays. I know my grandpa remembers that, but I always have been too scared to ask. I kinda just want to Okay, so moving on to the next story. This one is a paranormal encounter video. The title of the story is called I Think I'm Haunted by My Boyfriend, and Now He is Communicating with My Son. Okay, 15 years ago, at 17, my boyfriend and I were coming home from a date when we were in a car accident. A drunk driver T-boned us at a light. I was severely hurt and they thought I was going to die. Unfortunately, my boyfriend did die. He died on the scene. He was my high school sweetheart and I had known him since kindergarten. It was extremely hard for me to lose him. It is still hard to talk about. The last thing he did was take his hand and tried to brace me from the impact. That is so sad. It started about 2 weeks after I was able to go home, and 5 weeks after the accident. I would wake up to him screaming my name. I just thought it was a dream, but one day I heard him call me by my nickname that he gave me, and I saw a silhouette of a shadow figure sitting on the other side of my bed. Then it disappeared. There are things like this constantly, even now. I never told anybody because I didn't want my family to think I'm crazy. After 5 years, I finally decided to move on and met someone else after college. We decided to move in together. I was packing my stuff and decided to leave my stuffed animals with my parents to put in the attic. I know I put every stuffed animal in a box because I kind of have ADHD and I check and recheck. But when I got to our new apartment, the stuffed animal my deceased boyfriend had given me for my 16th birthday was in one of the moving boxes. I still continued to see his shadow and hear his voice, but still never mentioned it. My boyfriend and I decided to get married, and then we had 2 kids. My son is about 4 years old, and last week he was in his room playing, and I heard him talking to someone, like it was a real conversation. I just thought maybe it was him using his imagination. I walk in to ask him who he was talking to, and he said, "You know who it is, Mommy." My son said my deceased boyfriend's name. I asked him to repeat it in case I misheard it, and it was his name. I asked if he talks to him a lot. He said not a lot, but sometimes. I haven't told my husband about this as I'm scared, and it's a conversation I don't want to have. He doesn't believe in ghosts. I'm scared he will think I'm nuts. Sometimes I wonder that myself, but now my son is involved, so I'm here asking if anyone can tell me what this could be. Could it really be him? What should I do about it? If it is something, could it hurt my son? And that is the end of that story. That one's really, really creepy too. I can't even imagine. I feel so bad for this woman having been in an accident with her boyfriend like that. It would be really interesting if he was haunting her. I'm saying haunting her, or just sticking by her side after death. And why is a very good question. Why would he do that? I need a little brave juice for these next 2 stories. That's good. That was definitely a well-written story that I just read. Okay, this next story is not safe for work, and it is very disturbing in my opinion. So I'm just gonna jump right in. This story is called Forrest Ranger Story. And the person who wrote this said, I was on night shift. I patrolled the park looking for any type of illegal activity, like drug use, prostitution, poaching. I got a call for a man looking into a cabin where a summer camp was going on. So, great. Some fucking creep probably jerking it to little girls. I blacked out my headlights and sirens, parked a little ways down, and walked in hopes of catching the guy. Sure as shit, the homie was looking in windows. I start my approach and flick on my flashlight and told him not to move and to show me his hands. He turns around, looks at me, and starts saying he's sorry. I put him in handcuffs and detained him while I searched him and waited for backup. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm like having a flashback. This story reminds me of an even more disturbing story about these kids who go on summer break with their school, and a fucking sociopath, serial killer, comes in at night and fucking, it's so bad. This is a true story, and I'm sorry, I'm like digressing a little bit, but I can't remember where I heard it from. I think it was a podcast. This motherfucker snuck into this camp of little girls, I think, and he raped a whole cabin of little girls and then strangled them to death. And so it was so bad, and like the people in the tent over were awake and they thought they heard something, but they never went and checked, and these little girls lost their lives. That story stuck with me, and now I'm paranoid. If I ever have a kid, I don't know if I want them going on a public school camp. But that's just because I'm fucked up from all these horror stories. Okay, back to this story. I'm so sorry to digress like that. Okay, so he turns around, looks at me, and starts saying he's sorry. I put him in handcuffs and detained him while I searched him and waited for backup. I found his ID, a knife, and some miscellaneous things. I put him into another officer's vehicle while I made contact with the counselors. They stated they had seen him earlier in the day, but thought nothing of it. After taking statements, I ran his name. He was a registered sex offender. I opened the door to talk to him, and not my proudest moment, but I was tired. He was looking at little kids, and I said, "What the fuck do you think you're doing, you sick fuck?" He looked me in the eyes, no reaction, and said to me in a cold, monotone voice, "I was able to smell them. They're ready to breed, officer." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just closed the door. I stayed on scene for the rest of the night to ease everyone's mind and act as a deterrent. Obviously, he ended up being charged. Thinking about what he said and the way he said it still makes me feel sick. He's now banned and I believe still in prison, where I believe creeps like him should stay forever. He ruined a great outdoor experience and may have scared these poor kids from camping, hiking, fishing, or hunting, and just enjoying the outdoors for life. I could go on and on about some of the awful people and shit I've heard seen and responded to, but cases involving children in any way are the worst. And that's the end of that crazy story. I'm so glad that he caught this guy and this guy's in prison. Just like that story that I interrupted the story with. Anybody who hurts children, I'm just not gonna say anything, but there is a special place in hell for people like that, is all I can really say. Moving on. I told you that was a disturbing story. Okay, so I have one more story, and it's kind of scary. It's not as disturbing as the last one in my opinion, but it's actually pretty scary, so. Okay, here we go. So, I live in a condo in a small town right on the edge of a state park, and about 10 years ago, on the other side of the condo, there was a really popular golf course, but it ended up going out of business and is now abandoned. It's still kept well. On either side of my screened-in porch are my two neighbors' porches. In between my porch and my neighbor's porch on the left, there is a dip into the building where a hedge blocks my and her windows. And directly across from my screened porch is a flower bush. Further on, a small line of weeds and small trees that marks the property line. And even further beyond that is a separate house that has bright lights on all night. Anyways, now that you know the layout, I had gone to sleep early after work and ended up staying up quite late last night. Or that night, I had gone out onto my porch to have a cigarette and some devil lettuce after my boyfriend had gone to bed. Pausing the story. Whoever calls weed devil's lettuce, I think that's so cute. I've never really heard it called that before, but there's something humorous about it for sure. Okay. It was around 2:40 a.m. Before I could even light my cigarette, I felt uncomfortable. I felt a sort of pit in my spine. I felt kind of watched. I rationalized and told myself no one was outside, and I'd just finished my cigarette, hit my bong, and go inside. So I shone my phone flashlight out into the yard, saw nothing, and I sat down. I turned on a video, finished my cigarette, and started to prepare my bowl. All the while, I was still feeling very weird. After I'd finished a bowl and was preparing another, I swear to you, I saw a hunched silhouette go along the property line, past the little trees to the right, in the light of the house across the way. I sat up immediately and turned my phone off. I closed my eyes so I could listen harder, and I heard nothing. It was nothing. At this point, I was totally paranoid. There was no way I'd just seen something creep by. If it was someone sneaking by, I would hear them. Humans are too clumsy, especially in the dark. Again, I shone my light out into the yard, but I couldn't see anything. Couldn't hear anything. I was thinking, Jesus, this is some good stuff because I'm paranoid as hell. But I had felt nervous before. I was just going to finish up and go inside. Then. In the middle of my business, I hear loud snapping noises in the flower bush in the yard. It's probably 100 feet away from where I'm sitting. I had forgotten to mention I have a curtain in the porch that blocks off the back corner where I usually sit, because this is a common occurrence for me coming out to smoke at 2 a.m. Anyways, snitch sneaking around in the yard. I'm listening as hard as I can. Again, and now my chest is tightened up. Once I've sat in silence for long enough, I decided it was an animal. I'm just gonna finish the cigarette and then I'll go in. But then I heard steps. Like something was deliberately creeping through the yard around the flower bush towards my left neighbor's porch. The steps were heavy, but quiet, and definitely coming back around from the left towards my porch. I was thinking about calling my boyfriend's phone so he would come out and get me. I was getting so scared. I decided that I was going to scare whatever it was. I hoped if I made a sudden loud noise, I'd scare any animal away. So I shoved the chairs opposite of me, and it did make a really loud noise. But after that, it was just silence. No crickets, no rustling, no animal running away. Nothing. I guess with me ignoring every feeling in my body, I decided further investigation was a good idea. Yeah, I think I would die if I were in a horror movie. Yeah. So I ripped the curtain open and flashed my light out into the yard again. But even though I see nothing again, this time it felt different. As I'm sweeping my light across the yard and to the left, towards the alcove with the windows, I heard this deep, guttural growling. It was coming from the direct left of me. It wasn't just growling though. In the growl, it was like a second tone, but it was a clicking sound. I wish I could describe it better. I slammed my cigarette out, picked up my shit, and came inside shaking like a leaf. It felt like I had been stalked, like whatever it was knew I knew it was there and was pissed that I was flashing lights at it. I don't know. Does anyone know what that could have been? Was it just an animal? What kind of animal makes clicking noises like that, though? I'd love some opinions. That is the end of that story. That is pretty terrifying. Girl, I wouldn't go back outside at 2 a.m. if there was some creature in the yard growling at you. That's crazy. It does sound very similar to, what is it, like oh gosh, what's the name of it? Skincrawler, or like the White Walkers. Not the White Walkers. Is this in Game of Thrones? But you know, the white humanoid figures that people claim to see. That's what it sounds like. And pretty creepy, Alright, so those were my 4 stories. I had to make sure I read all 4 of them. I did. Those are the 4 stories that I have picked out today. I really hope you liked them. I'll leave the link for all of them down below so you can go and read them yourselves and give the writers credit. And yeah, I had a lot of fun making this today. It's been a while since I've done a creepy stories video. I did start a ASMR playthrough of Our Life Beginnings and Hallways. I've been kind of struggling with the audio on that one, but I think I'll get it in the 3rd episode. Anyway, it's a great